I don't have any special area of expertise in terms of, constitutional law, other than, what every lawyer should have, basic understanding of the Constitution. But I can also read. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now, a lot of confusion, is because the governor kind of put out ambiguous documents, and then you've got different people of different interpretive capacities trying to go off of those things. As a general matter, I mean, we've been practicing the social distancing here in the office since before the governor's order went into effect. I think it's people are getting sick. There are cases, right? I'm not one of these people who think the whole thing's made up. I think that it is possibly less of a threat than the virus itself. Maybe is less of a threat than some people think it is. And what really troubles me, though, is even if it is the most extreme threat, I'm not really seeing an intelligent cost-benefit analysis, any kind of economic reasoning. One analogy I draw is, we have 40,000 car crash deaths in this country every year, and we could eliminate them entirely, instantly, by just banning cars, right? But we don't do that because we do an economic cost-benefit analysis. We understand if you have these things on the road, a certain number of people are going to die. But we say the benefits of the personal automobile are so great that we're going to allow that. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm also deeply concerned about the erosion of our rights and liberties. I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me to the law is really properly understood, in my opinion. And the best thing about the law is that it is a framework, a system of rules that kind of lets every person in society know where they stand with relation to other people. Lets us use scarce resources without violent conflict. I really think the true purpose of law is to allocate property rights. Now we get into kind of the legal philosophy stuff. But so as far as this order, I've been following the situation closely. In preparation for this, I pulled the order, pulled the relevant constitutional provisions that the government is saying justify it, pulled the statutes that they're also claiming authority from. I've got a few different things that, kind of jumped out to me. I don't know if there's any particular area you'd like to go into first, Tom, or?
Well, so, and I wish I was working on trying to get this multi-platform thing up with this tech friend of mine, and I was all watching what he was doing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to prepare notes and all that stuff. So anyway, and I also clicked record after our intro, so that the whole thing we got on Facebook, so I think we're good there as long as, can Facebook hear? Jason, can you hear me? Anybody say yes? Anyway, so basically what I ended up, I'm a law guy myself. I mean, I would be an attorney, but I felt like by the time I got my degree, I'd keel over dead with it and kill my kids with a $300,000 debt. But law has become so bastardized anymore. It's completely something different than I ever imagined it was. And you don't really know that until you get into law. I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, that's really, really important that I like to focus on a lot is jurisdiction. The other one I really like to talk about is really talking about the hierarchy of law. When you talk about it's a set of rules, it's a set of rules. Okay, it's a set of, you're coming in a little bit low, but I don't have any ability to boost your volume.
I have an ability on my end?
I don't think so. I think I'm just going to have to raise the volume and sound like I'm screaming. Hang on. I think I'm about as loud as I can go. I think Facebook, that's about all I can do, guys. Hang on. So really talking about the hierarchy of law and all that, maybe it's this thing, that I really want to talk about. When we talk about the uniformity of law, as I understand it, you've got God's law, you've got natural rights, you've got common law, you've got constitutional law, then you've got civil law, and you've got all of these, you've got administrative policy, and then you get into all of the minutia of everything. I think a lot of the confusion is what we're seeing as myself as a constitutionalist is, if the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that's fine. Now we're getting into the weeds already when we talk about jurisdiction between the difference of the state constitution and the federal constitution that most people are really not aware of. So I'd like you to be able to just briefly go into that and to be able to talk about, when you pulled the things to pull, what did you pull? Why did you pull them? And what were you hoping to gain by what you pulled? And if we could glean anything from you, from what you've learned, perhaps maybe what we could do to be able to do our homework. Because for me, what they're doing is a complete violation of their supreme oath, which is to protect life, liberty, and property. And as Russ Fulcher said the other day, this is the first time in American history they made it illegal to work.
Yeah.
What say you?
And go to church, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know. Some of the terms you mentioned, to me, I hear those terms in what I'm going to call our circles: patriots, liberty people, libertarians, whatever that means, right? Conservative Republicans. I hear some of those terms, and to me, some of them are more descriptive kind of colloquialisms than they are, like God's law. I'm a person of faith myself. I don't know what God's law means in terms of a legal framework for how society operates, because it means different things to different people. Even, my fellow Christians and I'm sure don't share all the same opinions on that. But I did like what you talked about, the difference between the federal and the state constitutions and how those interact in the jurisdiction of both. Well, obviously, the state constitution is going to apply, obviously, within that state's borders. And then the federal constitution, in theory, applies all over the country. Now, one thing that I did pull is because in some of the defenses of what the government is doing, you will hear them cite to things government did, 100, 120 years ago, dealing with smallpox outbreaks and things like that. And, they burn people's homes and they burn people's clothes. And okay, well, first of all, I don't think what many people realize is that the rights contained in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, those were not automatically applied to the states in the original conception. I don't think a lot of people realize that some states had established religions into the 1830s even. I think some states were Congregationalists, some were Episcopalian, et cetera. So, when they talk about these old situations and what the government was doing then, well, I'm looking at, when these rights were actually incorporated, right? Well, the guarantee of free exercise of religion contained within the First Amendment was not incorporated against the states until 1940. That was Cantwell v. Connecticut. The guarantee of freedom of assembly was not incorporated against the states until 1937. So, and to me,
well, that goes back to the incorporation doctrine, right? The original incorporation doctrine.
And a lot of
states
people
are elected their duty to the feds.
Yeah, just to briefly lay out what that is. And a lot of people in our circles disagree with it, but it is the law of the land. That's what the Supreme Court uses. That's what's applied today. So basically, the 14th Amendment was passed after the Civil War. There's disputes about whether it was properly ratified, et cetera. But essentially, what that 14th Amendment did is it said the states could not deny constitutional rights to citizens of those states, and it would, specifically the newly freed slaves in the southern states. And so one by one, the courts have incorporated these rights as against the states. And it takes a case, and they weren't incorporated all at once. The Heller decision, a famous case, firearms rights case a few years back, that dealt with the federal government. Then there was an accompanying case that actually incorporated the Second Amendment as against the states with regard to keeping a personal firearm in the home.
Okay.
So all that to say, I'm not persuaded by some of the defenses when they go back to things the government did 120 years ago when we had a completely different legal framework.
Right. Well, so I'm looking at, when you go back to the, the Barron's versus Baltimore and the insular cases and those kinds of things, where when I was going through Randy Barnett's book with the Lost Constitution and all of that very, very, very detailed issue on the 14th Amendment, which I was very, very happy about. I'm not happy with this position on the con, but anyway, but it was really good to be able to help me understand that, when the incorporation doctrine took off, what it did was it absolutely flipped the Bill of Rights exactly backwards, and they were actually applied against the states rather than maintaining the rights of the states against the federal government. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say, and I think also there's a problem when people cite to what the founders thought, right? Because the founders were not just one group of people. There were lots of different opinions. Sure. But I think it's clear from what they drafted that the original Constitution and the original 10 amendments didn't really have anything to do with the states. And in fact, you look at the 9th and 10th amendments, 10th Amendment especially, it doesn't really make any sense to apply that as against the state, right? Because it says, the states retain their rights. So how would that apply to the state? So to me, it's clear that at least as drafted, the Constitution was not originally intended to apply to the state. So it did upend the order. And over time, as these rights have been incorporated, the state's ability to regulate certain things has been restricted. And I think that's kind of where we're getting to here with this discussion in terms of the restrictions that we're under now, the legal justifications for them, et cetera.
Yeah, so if I had to ask you, I mean, so now we got into the weeds and maybe confused some people that are not law nerds. But
That's what I'm afraid of.
well, I mean, that's okay, because, at some point we got to take people out of their 140 character Twitter sphere, and to be able to let them know that part of the reason why we got here, or the entire reason we got here, or the major reason we got here, is because we decided that we wanted to shirk our civic duty and allow the government to be able to jump outside the box. Now we're all frantically trying to figure out, I mean, I've been an activist for almost 15 years. I have more people that are contacting me now asking me what to do, when I was trying to beat the doors down 10 years ago, getting people involved in what to do back then, because a lot of us knew that this was going to happen. So when we look at the governor's, order, and without putting you too much on the spot, in your view, constitutional or not? And make your case for either side.
Sure. Well, I think that is the place you start. And that's where the governor started in terms of defending his authority here. So if you go to the state's coronavirus website, they of course do have the actual enforceable order. And I think it's important to mention that this order, this is what is enforceable. The supplementary materials are not enforceable at all. And that's gotten into some confusion about, are you allowed to travel more than near your home for outdoor activities? And different sheriffs have had different interpretations. But so I'm looking at the FAQ they put out, frequently asked questions list about the stay-at-home order. You get a couple pages into it. It says, does the governor have the authority to issue a stay-at-home order? And I think we can just take this point by point, because it really brings me down through, where I would go on it. In terms of legal interpretation, you generally start with the Constitution, then you go through the statutes. So the first thing they say is yes. No surprise there. And it says, the governor is the commander of the militia under Article 4, Section 4. And so let's stop there. So the commander of the militia. So you look at the Idaho Constitution. Governor is commander of the militia. The governor shall be commander-in-chief of the military forces of the state, except when they shall be called into actual service of the United States. He shall have power to call the militia to execute the laws, to suppress insurrection, or to repel invasion. So I didn't
we can't even get past that part, because now we have to question the militia and whether the National Guard is the militia, and if they're not, where is our militia anyway?
But even I just want to say this one thing real quick. Even if it is, Tom, even if the militia is exactly what they say it is, it's the National Guard's been called out. Nothing in here has anything about closing down businesses, putting the entire state on a lockdown status. So they just assert that this provision justifies it. Honestly, I think someone was asking a question.
Where? On Facebook?
Was it AJ?
What am I looking at? Where are you looking at?
So I'm looking at the gallery view where it shows me everyone. I thought I saw someone trying to ask a question in there, but maybe not.
Oh, geez, I totally forgot about that. Well, I'm looking. I don't have anything on the text, and I don't know.
Well, I'll just keep going, and then Tom, feel free to jump in with questions, or I don't mind if other people have questions also.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, I have a habit of talking too much, so I really don't want to do that.
Yeah, we're in the same club. So so we dealt with the militia issue. I don't see anything in this provision talks about the governor as the commander-in-chief of the militia that would authorize what we have now. So to me, that one's moot. And fellow attorneys, if I'm wrong, if there's something that I can't read, tell me if I can't read. I'd like to know. But prove me wrong. Don't just call me names. So we move on to the next thing. The supreme executive power is vested within the governor under Article 4, Section 5 of the Idaho Constitution. Article 4, Section 5, supreme executive power vested in governor. The supreme executive power of the state is vested in the governor, who shall see that the laws are faithfully executed. To me, that just says he has to execute the laws, which is the function of any chief executive in any branch of government. I mean, that is the executive function. Again, it doesn't indicate that he can make law. It doesn't indicate that he can impose the types of restrictions that we're seeing. I'm not seeing anything in that text. So, they throw out these two constitutional provisions, just assert them. And I think the intent, and you see this in other organizations, but the intent, they throw them out and they hope that 90% of the people don't bother to actually look at it. They just hope, I'm going to throw it out and the questions will be answered, the questions will stop. Okay, so those are the two constitutional provisions they cite to. I didn't see anything in there that could authorize this. I could be wrong. If someone has a different opinion, I'm always willing to hear it. Then they say, this authority is codified throughout Idaho law. The authority to issue orders such as the stay-at-home order is found within Chapter 6, Title 46 of Idaho Code. Additional authority is found within Chapter 10, Title 46. Again, when you have these vague citations to law and they say, oh, it's found within the chapter, that should be a clue. Your spidey senses should be going off that you're being sold a bill of goods here. And then it goes on. The specific statutes granting the governor authority to issue such an order are Idaho Code 46601 and Idaho Code 461008. So let's look at those codes real quick. 46601. This is essentially the governor's emergency powers. It says that he can declare a state of emergency when there's peril to the safety of persons and property within the state, any part of the state, etc. He's authorized to promulgate, issue, and enforce rules, regulations, and orders which he considers necessary for the protection of life and property. Such rules, regulations, and orders shall, whenever practicable, be prepared in advance of extreme emergency. Well, that didn't happen here, obviously. It seemed like the governor actually came to school without his homework when he had his press conference because he couldn't answer a single question. It actually looked like they hadn't even drafted the order at that point. But again, I think it kind of gets down to what kind of society are we. I grew up with the impression, and I think the correct legal view is that we're a society of limited powers, limited, defined, enumerated powers of the state. And essentially, this 46601 statutorily, right? And maybe this gets back to what you were talking about, different kinds of law, right? I mean, what is legal is not necessarily what's moral, and what's moral is not necessarily what's legal, right? So, I mean, it could be that you have laws that are just wrong, right? I mean, if there's a law that says you have to turn in Jews hiding in the attic, I mean, that's not a just law, right? So, but under the most generous reading of this, I don't see where this would give him the authority again to close down arbitrarily defined non-essential businesses, prohibit gatherings of churches, which again is a per se constitutional violation on 2 counts. We've never seen anything like that in this country. And in the Heller decision, the justices and the majority actually wrote, we know of no other enumerated constitutional right which is subject to an interest balancing approach. If it's enumerated in the Constitution, it doesn't give discretion. It is what it says what it says with the understanding that the people of the time had when they enacted it. So I don't, despite what this law 46601 may say, I don't think that a statute can authorize the governor to promulgate rules that are per se unconstitutional.
Well, we're going to talk about when we talk about the hierarchy of law. What I was referring to was more along the lines of understanding the level of the statutes, the level of administrative policy. I don't want to get into the weeds on who they apply to, because I think that's beyond the scope. Well, it might not even be beyond the scope. I mean, I was a strong believer that if the president can create an executive order because of the fact that he couldn't be a tyrant and there were checks and balances on the system, the only power that he had as an executive order was to be able to apply to his branch, because it was an administrative order. It wasn't a lawful order. And furthermore, what we're dealing with locally here is the definition between lawful and legal, where Lawrence Wasden had said that it was legal. I have no problem with believing that whatever they want to create out of the thin blue sky, whatever, is legal. I'll give them that. It's in a de facto color of law form of government, and down the weeds we go on that one, pulling back momentarily. But what is lawful? So when you look at the altruisms that people like me focus on for the most part, is that when governments were instituted, they were instituted to be able to protect, to do certain things, to protect life, liberty, and property. I'm not seeing where the government has the authority at any level to be able to restrict any of that to the point where it takes a basic right and criminalizes you for it. And I believe what we're talking about is that would be something that would be color of law or statute, but it would also be inferior to not necessarily the Constitution, because to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the state constitution anyway, because I believe that it grants them a lot more power than the few and defined powers that the average, patriot doesn't maybe understand, and doesn't really understand that the few and defined powers doesn't necessarily apply to the states. But there is an issue between lawful and legal. There is in the Idaho Code something relating to de facto and de jure, which sets forth, I guess, the proper delineation of law. But here's the thing I'm saying, right? You got Congressman Fulcher that calls the other day on the radio, and he says this is the first time in history that the government has made working illegal. And so on the on that level alone, and the big one for me is anytime that a right is ever violated, there has to be a remedy for the citizen. In addition, for something to be lawful, there has to be a limit on the authority the government has. And when I talk to law enforcement and any other agency that I've been talking to, this is so ambiguous, law enforcement doesn't even want to touch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, with all due respect to Congressman Fulcher, I think he's a bit incorrect because, I mean, the government has certainly prohibited certain professions, right, over time, and has extremely restricted certain. This is the first time it's been this widespread. So, and I do like Russ a lot, so I'm not criticizing him, but yeah, I mean, this is unprecedented.
Yeah, me too.
And as far as yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about was that we have this issue of law enforcement that I'm hugely concerned about. There's a growing unrest. There's a growing concern. Law enforcement is kind of freaked out about this because here they're between a rock and a hard place. They're not really sure what to do. A lot of them have been trained through their post academy that any law that any political subdivision creates is somehow law. And I mean, I can't harm them. I can't fault them for that because the citizens, again, were derelict in making sure that the proper things were being taught to the citizens. And now we're trying to be able to climb backwards. But what I see is an absolute recipe for disaster. And I had communicated with my law enforcement friends about that. And hopefully they'll find a way to be able to do interviews with me on this too, to be able to navigate through this. But I've seen that the media likes to be able to hype stuff, to get people fearful. And people make bad decisions when they're fearful and they're scared, right? Especially when we're losing our country. We're going to start going after the cops and we're going to start blaming people. When I first read my first book when I was 45, man, I thought everybody was the enemy. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until I started talking and learning about, how things work to where I really started to become, comfortable trying to understand both sides of the argument. So, somebody could say we have a police state. We don't really, we don't support government and all that. But I do believe in government. I always have. I've always believed in a limited form of government that did what it was supposed to do. But when it steps outside, the people now are left with, well, what are we supposed to do now? And now what? And I made the bold statement on Facebook. I said the violation of the remedy for a violation of rights is not judiciable. Because what it does is it takes the inherent rights of man and it allows the government to be able to determine what they are just by going to court. Am I right or not?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the system that we live under, right? And I think this kind of gets back to your distinction between legal and lawful. I mean, let me just say where I stand, just so there's no confusion here. And you and I are not exactly in the same place with this. I'm not trying to describe my views to you or whatever, but in terms of the government, what I say is I oppose the state. In my opinion, government is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a form of human organization, right? Churches have government, homeowners associations have government. Clubs, whatever, corporations have government.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, and so, I don't necessarily oppose government, but I oppose the state. And to me, the state is a unique form of government which claims a monopoly over a defined geographic territory to initiate aggression. And aggression, to me, is shorthand for a violation of property rights, right? And the way the state functions, the inherent nature of the state is it takes resources forcibly, right? It has to do that to function. We call taxation. And to me, when you take something that doesn't belong to you without the permission of the owner, I think we used to call that theft. So taxation might be theft.
It depends on who takes it.
To redefine terms. So you know what? I'm a philosophical anarchist, but I also live here in the real world with the rest of us, right? In the real world is we have this government, right? The state, federal governments, local governments, they exist. And so as an attorney, I'm trying to work within them, and I have certain ideological and idealistic viewpoints and goals. But I think, and we can go either way you want with this, Tom, but I mean, I think even if you accept that, hey, you crazy people talking about what government should be, your inalienable rights, whatever, that's all nut stuff. I think even if you accept that for the sake of argument, I still don't think what's in here is justifiable. And I would like to talk about the law enforcement thing a little bit more if you want to do that now or later on.
No, it's whatever. Hey, all I want to do is we're going to be doing some Q&A, you guys. I don't know how to. Can you see comments that are there comments coming in?
I haven't seen anything come through in the group chat, but I think it's set on everyone. So I think anyone can post something in the group chat, and I'm happy to answer a question.
Okay, so if you guys want to take the opportunity, I don't know how much time Ed's got. We're at 30-minute mark right now. If you guys have questions, please start filtering those in, either in the group chat if you're on Zoom or on Facebook, and I'll try to scroll through. I'll try to scroll through what I can, if this allows me to. I don't even know how to do that. But anyway.
So just briefly on the law enforcement thing, I mean, that has been one of my serious concerns from the beginning. I'm perhaps more skeptical of law enforcement in general than you, Tom. So again, I'm not trying to ascribe my views, but here's my problem, right? Is the governor's order, and I'm just there's been some confusion on this, so I'm gonna set the record straight right now. There is nothing in this order that says you have to stay near your home. What does near your home mean? That's not a legal term, but there's nothing in the order that says you have to stay near your home to go recreate outdoors, right? But in some of the supplementary materials, like this frequently asked questions, it says, can I drive to a mountain town like McCall or Stanley? It says, generally, no. Do I have to stay home and inside, or can I go outside for exercise and recreation? Outdoor activity near your home is okay. Implying that outdoor activity not near your home is not okay, right? And
yep.
You know, and I saw there was something else the governor put on. I think it said outdoor activity near your home is not prohibited. And when you see prohibited in a legal context, that means bad, right? That's a stop sign. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like I'm saying, there's nothing in the order, the actual legally enforceable order, that puts a limit on distance for outdoor recreation. I think it probably is advisable to try to limit your travel if you can, but you know, there's nothing about that. But you have had local governments saying things like, we're going to stop cars with out of state or even out of county plates. The mayor of Mount Holmes said that. So I don't, and again, you know, let's accept that all this is valid, just arguendo. I mean, let's take the governor's point of view. There's nothing that would permit a mayor to suspend constitutional rights. The mayor cannot direct his cops to go pull people over without any reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime. And it's permitted to travel for essential activities, which includes operating essential business, for recreating outdoors. That's an essential activity where essential travel is authorized. So, yeah, that's my concern, is you have these mixed messages, right? And law enforcement in different counties and different localities is doing its best to interpret it. But what I'm really afraid is going to happen is you're going to have some Idahoan out there doing something that's not illegal, not wrong, you know, out there fishing or whatever, out in the rural boonies. And some police officer, you know, maybe he's a rookie, maybe he just has something to prove, tells him, you got to go.
Yeah.
Now, this is a state where a lot of people carry guns, and a lot of people don't like being told by government that they can't do something that they can do. And I'm concerned that that's going to lead to some confrontations, and people are going to get hurt. Good people are going to get hurt. Police officers and citizens. So I'm deeply concerned about that and the ambiguous messaging.
I think that's going to change. I mean, I think with you know, with the issues that we had with Bundy and Malheur County and stuff, you know, our targets probably, our state is probably red for concern by them, because they think that we're, you know, we're just a powder keg waiting to go off. And I would tend to actually agree with that, because you know, I have a finger on the pulse, I think, of a lot of the liberty circles, and I know what people are willing to tolerate. And to be quite honest, I'm surprised that we've tolerated this much. But all we need is a breaking point, you know. Yeah. When I met with the FBI one time, and they had asked me, they said, well, what is the breaking, you know, what are some of the things that, you know, that you believe are the breaking point? Well, and I said, well, you know, you guys are doing all the surveillance. You should have your finger on the pulse of all that. Yeah. You know, and I mean, I gave them a couple examples, you know, guns and all that, but
well, you know, I had someone, to that point, Tom, I had someone recently telling me, hey, there's nothing to worry about. You know, they haven't taken the guns yet. Just do what they're telling you and everything's gonna be fine. I said, well, what the heck's the point of them taking the guns? They don't need to take the guns. They've already got you to give up everything else. And that's what's also really disturbing to me, Tom, is there's some really good people that I respect. I think they really have good hearts, but they're buying into this thing of, oh, just trust the government, trust the government. And these are conservative Republicans, trust the government, the government will take care of you. They know what they're doing. Or I mean, oh, Trump has a secret plan. It hasn't been revealed yet, but trust in it. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, you people have lost your minds. Because there's every reason not to think that you can trust the government, especially in times of crisis. So that's also concerning to me.
Well, I'm looking for one event. I mean, I'm not looking for it, but I'm not opposed to thinking that there's going to be one event, like you said. There's going to be some backwoods, guy that that went sideways. Maybe the guy went fishing because he was in a fight with his wife, or he just got divorced, or something tragic, lost his dad or something. And it's just that consequence that happens that sets it off. And one thing I've watched that the government, or the state, I should start saying the state does, is that whenever somebody does something wrong or somebody gets hurt, what's the first thing they do? Oh, we've got to have a law for that. Oh, we got to have a law for that.
Right.
I mean, I think Middleton spent $50,000 on a hawk light, whatever that is. But, all of this protective, glittery stuff to be able to make sure that everybody knew it was a sidewalk. And I thought, if an event happens in Idaho, it's going to change everything. You know what I mean? And they're going to be forced to be able to step up. And that's where my fear is. And I want to be able to make sure that my law enforcement friends that are listening are knowing that, as constitutionalists, it's our job to be able to protect and secure the rights of everyone, including them, especially so many of the good ones that I know.
Well, and I think, Tom, that things have already irreparably changed. I mean, how many things that came about after 9/11 do we still have today? Like the idea that we can just bounce back, leave the economy alone, whatever, just the idea that we're going to put government back into the box that it was in prior to all this, I just think is hopelessly optimistic. I don't know, maybe you see it differently.
No, actually I don't. That was actually my next thing that I was going to bring up, because I was talking to one of my law enforcement friends today, and I said, it isn't so much that the American people are not willing to be able to accept the present terms of the way things are, if something is legitimately of concern. If we, like the severity of the virus, let's say, or the alleged severity of the virus, if the virus is of concern, the problem you're going to have is more with the people that don't obey the law, more like the leftists, than they're going to be with the people like myself that are constitutionalists. We understand the law. We understand the personal, the importance of self-governance and, and those kinds of things. But now that we're all home and we're spending time on YouTube and we're starting to look at the news and we're starting to research, now it's almost safe to say that we're all conspiracy theorists, because we can't find the truth because there's so much ambiguous information out there. But what we are finding is that something smells like a rat. Mm-hmm. And so not only do we have the issue of 9/11, our new 9/11 that's going to come, because this will forever change our country, I'm sure. But also let's add the economic part of that 2008, bailout, where the bankers are going to get bailed out and we get mere pittance. I mean, it's not like I want money from the government, but I mean, if this thing is going to be to save the country, let's really think about what we're doing.
Yeah, and it is a little bit disingenuous, in my opinion, when congressional Republicans say, "Oh, giving away free money to people, that's against our principles." But giving money to big banks, that's no problem whatsoever. I mean, that's a little disingenuous for sure.
Well, should the citizens not be frustrated? But I mean, my thing is do the citizens have the right to be frustrated? And here's the thing: if there is a remedy for every abuse, or for every right that is abused, there's a remedy. Where's the remedy for this situation when we have a boundless government, we have abusive bureaucracies? They're clearly trying to be able to, it looks like, agitate to rebellion. You've got these guys that want us to tell on each other and all these other things. How do we, and I think maybe I'm jumping to this, but I guess first I'll ask you, in your view of all of the things that you see right now, where do you see this going?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, you have some people who are literally still talking about 18 months. I don't think people are going to accept that. You know, I noticed I live up in Boise County, right? And I drive into Boise for work. And I noticed last week, you know, significant reduction of cars on the road. I'm starting to see that come back. I think people, you know, especially when the numbers are where they are, you know, and you know, there's some kind of a fatigue that happens when you keep telling people, wait till next week. It's going to be really bad next week. Next week's going to be the apocalypse, you know, and then it doesn't happen. I mean, you see this in religious movements where they prophesy the end of the world and it doesn't happen, and then those movements dissolve, right? I think we're kind of seeing that fatigue where people are like, okay, you know what? Like, I understand some people are getting sick, but people get sick all the time. I still got to make rent, you know, although people are getting some relief from that in some regards. But you talked about justiciability. Part of the issue, Tom, right now is the courts. You know, I mean, the very restricted operations. In theory, I mean, you can sue try to get an emergency injunction. But, you know, I consulted with a guy earlier today about this, Tom, and I told him, I said, you know, you and I agree on the legality of these orders, but A, suing the government is always very, very difficult. And two, I hate to break it to people, but I'm going to let people in on a little secret. Attorneys are just like everybody else, right? There's like 10% of us that are liberty people. There's like 10% that are hardcore statists, and the other 80% are somewhere in the middle or just don't care. They're complacent, you know, and judges and justices on state appellate courts and Supreme Courts, they're cut from the exact same cloth as attorneys. So I told him, I said, I think that your odds of successfully suing the government on this are probably low. I think most people in general are kind of okay with the government telling them what to do, and they trust the government for whatever reason. And I think most attorneys are kind of in the same boat. You know, I'm seeing what my attorney friends are posting on their listservs and stuff, and I think most of them are just kind of go along to get along. And I think most judges are going to kind of be there too.
A lot of the attorneys that I talk to that are good ones, like I think it was the one that you actually work with, Ryan, right? Do you work with?
No.
Do you work with Ryan? Okay.
Edward Kohler is my partner, and then I'm in a professional association with Nate Peterson and Caitlin Mitchell.
Oh, okay. Well, some of them just say, you know, they're really good people. They're
You
more
mean Ryan
conscious.
Jenks?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know Ryan. Yeah, he's a good guy.
He's got an interesting story too.
Oh yeah.
Anybody doesn't know him, they should get to know him. But they simply say, you know, when I was inquiring about if I should jump in and go to law school and all that, they said, you know, it's a horrible place to be. It's a cesspool, but you know, a lot of them have the desire to be able to truly help people in a system that they know is failing. I think a lot of it, before I started becoming an activist, I thought that the attorneys, because we've heard that you guys have been tarred and feathered since the 1200s or whatever, but we thought, you know, that you're part of that system. Of course, we won't get into the bar association and all that, but they didn't realize that there's a heart and there's a family man and there's a person behind that, you know, that exterior that really is just trying to do the best they can in a failing system. And so I can't imagine how many times you're beating your own head against the wall.
Yeah, well, you know, and I get accused of hypocrisy from time to time. You know, people say, well, how can you be against the state when you work within a status system? How can you be an attorney but be against law? Well, first of all, I'm not really against law. I think the state has co-opted law in the same way they co-opted roads and healthcare and everything else. Doesn't mean I oppose roads or healthcare. I oppose the state provision of them. But, you know, also, even if I'm a hypocrite, so what? So Edward Dindinger is a hypocrite. So does that mean that everything the government's doing is valid? Or if I had never been born, then it would be invalid? It's kind of a crazy, confused argument. And I also see it the same way. You know, how about a CPA who helps people, you know, minimize their income tax burden? How about a criminal defense attorney who's trying to help some guy on a drug charge on our ridiculous drug, you know, criminalization scheme? You know, how about a cancer doctor who doesn't like cancer, right? I mean, you know, the fact that you operate within the reality of the world, I don't think that really has any bearing. But yes, I mean, the legal system, it is a cesspool in large part. And most attorneys, yeah, probably, I mean, they're not, let's put it this way, they're not really liberty-loving people. I think a lot of people get into law because they have some idealistic path, but it's hard. You know, you can only beat your head against the wall so much. We do the best we can here. I mean, I believe in our clients' cases. I mean, and you know, I'll take on a case. You know, I've actually stated this publicly. I'll say it again here. That if someone is arrested by some rogue law enforcement officer or cited, for violating this restriction in terms of, well, not violating, but if they're arrested or cited for traveling more than some arbitrary distance from their home to recreate outdoors, I'll defend at least one case pro bono. Okay, so I mean, I believe in this stuff, and I try to keep my idealism as much as I can. You know, given that the fact that the way our current scheme of law, the over legislation of everything, the over statutory nature of the regime, it is disheartening. And it is far from what I could see, even, you know, even in a limited government minarchist perspective, I think we've gotten so far away from it. I don't know how we fix it, to be honest with you. I'm not particularly optimistic or hopeful.
So how much time do we got? We're at 46 minutes. Should we go to Q&A?
Yeah, it looks like AJ put a question here in the chat, so I wanted, he's been waiting on that for a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
So AJ's asking, what seems like the most likely scenario where we may begin to see enforcement of the elements of this order in Idaho, as opposed to simply compliance? And I assume he means voluntary compliance there. Well, you know, my whole theory on this is that Little was kind of pressured into this. I think he knew that if he tries to put out an order where it's like, if you leave your house without the right papers, you know, then you're going to be subject to a criminal charge, I think people are going to freak out. This is still Idaho to some regard. So he felt like he had to put something out because he was getting criticized left and right. Rachel Maddow, I guess, skewered him about it because he wasn't doing enough. That's another problem. Of course, the bias to action. You know, this idea that no matter what the problem is, the government needs to do something. It doesn't matter what it is, but they got to do something. Right? Everyone's always saying the government needs to do something. So this order comes out. You know, it's very, very vague, very limited ability to enforce it. I mean, some of the stuff's kind of ridiculous. It says even if you're doing an essential activity, you still need to keep with the social distancing requirements. Handshakes are banned, right? So I mean, if I shake my law partner's hand, are they going to come charge us both with a misdemeanor? Come and get me, you know, fine. But, you know, I don't know, AJ, honestly, I think if we see some kind of spike in the death tolls, that's what's going to do it. But right now, the numbers where they are, I don't think that's going to support that. But if the death tolls do spike, that wouldn't take much. I mean, right now, you know, what we're looking at is not even a statistical blip, but people are freaking out. So, I mean, if we get 100 deaths in a couple days here in Idaho, you might see some kind of crazy order. And I mean, the Republican Party is divided on it right now. I mean, I know a lot of hardcore liberty Republicans that are against this, but I know a lot of people that I thought were hardcore liberty Republicans that, again, like I said, have this thing about just trust in your leaders. You know, they're doing the right thing. Trump's got a master plan. He'll let you in on it. It's 10D chess. You know, that's crazy. So I hope that answers your question, AJ. The answer is I don't know, but I think it would take some sort of spike in deaths or hospital overcrowding, which we haven't really seen.
So then my next question's on Facebook. Aaron asks, if the government won't enforce constitutional law in a fearful world, who will? My question is well, that would bring up another question. And what is constitutionally to you? Has it really become that relative? Because I know a lot of people that say they're constitutionalists, they vary in constitutional education, right?
Well, and here's kind of my view on constitutions in general. Like, I like constitutions to the extent that having a written framework, a written limits on government is preferable to the alternative generally. But rights are not self-enforcing, which is kind of what the question is getting at. I mean, if the government's not going to do it, you know, then the only other option is kind of do a 1776 kind of number. Yeah. And I hope I don't live to see that, because that's going to be really, really ugly. But, you know, in general, though, you know what? The Constitution was pretty good for what it was in 1789. You know, that was pretty darn good. But I reject the idea that, you know, because some guys wrote some stuff down 200 years ago, that is the actual limit of my rights and liberty. So I don't really hold the Constitution as a sacred document. I know that's going to irk some people. I don't think it's this amazing thing and it's the be all and end all. It's pretty good for its time, but you know what? To the extent I can use it to restrain the state, I support it. To the extent it limits what I feel is true human liberty, I oppose it. But yeah, I mean, the rights are not self-enforcing. I don't know what to tell people. I mean, and the thing too is, I mean, then you start getting into just war theory. You know, is it just to start some sort of violent insurrection without a reasonable chance of success? I don't think there's a reasonable chance of success. Maybe we're getting a little into some dangerous waters here. I don't know.
We don't need to do that. Yeah, we don't need to do that. I think a lot of it is, you know, I think I saw a question early on. It said that there was a, you know, if the government continues to do what it does, there will be a breaking point. I think you and I agree on that. I think anybody that knows anything about our history knows that. The question then is,
I
I
don't
think
know, Tom.
a lot of us are in fear, man. I mean, we want to be lawful people, but you know, we want what's rightfully ours under God, and the things that government was supposed to protect. And if the government isn't going to be able to do what it's supposed to do, I'm not going to talk about overthrowing and insurrection.
Sure.
What I'm talking about is there has to be a corrective mechanism. And for me, and you know this as well as most people do, I am openly admitted a conspiracist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think we all are now to some degree. But when you start looking at empty hospitals and you start looking at the fudged numbers and you start looking at the CDC documents that have come out, I mean, there are these conspiratorial documents. I'm telling you something. If the government really, really, really wanted to gain the trust of the people, it would be open and it would be accepting questions from people like myself that are willing to be able to say, well, explain why you've got citizen media all over Brooklyn and all over Germany and all over Ireland and all over all of these places that have empty parking lots where they're talking about this is the epicenter of a crisis and we're in dire need of this and that and the other, and all of these other elements that just don't make sense. The citizens would be way more willing to be able to continue to do what we're doing right now if things were or appeared more legitimate, but they can't continue to hide the lie anymore.
Well, but yeah, Tom, but I think sometimes it's tough because we live and breathe this stuff and we're in these circles and we assume more people think like us than actually do. We're in the tiny, tiny minority, Tom. You know, honestly, most people don't have the interest or the aptitude, right? They're not seeking out this information, right? They get the official line and they go on with their lives, right? It's not that important to them. And those who do see the information, most of them just don't care, you know, and you know, I used to in my younger days think that there would be a breaking point. I'm not so sure anymore. I mean, you look at other countries that have accepted far more restrictions on freedoms, you know, willingly. I mean, you look at European countries, you know, Asian countries, they've accepted far more limits on their freedoms than we have now. But you know what, with this coronavirus thing, I mean, what more do they have to do, Tom? You know, you can't go to church. It's a misdemeanor offense to hold a church service.
Yeah. Not since the
I
Civil War, man.
don't know. If that doesn't do it for people, I don't know what will. Like I said, they don't need to take the guns at that point.
Well, Ammon's got a plan for 1,000 people to be at for church service at Easter. So we know that the whole world's got his eyes on that because he's not a name that is not well known. I have another question. Kathy from Midvale, I think, asked if we can still assemble at this time, or are we still limited to 10? I don't think we can assemble at all now, right? In your view?
Yeah, according to this, it's, you know, if it's a non-essential gathering, right, you can't have it if it's more than 10 people. And it specifically says in here, and I'll read this verbatim so no one thinks I'm shading or exaggerating the situation. All people in Idaho shall immediately cease hosting or participating in all public and private gatherings and multi-person activities for social, spiritual, and recreational purposes, regardless of the number of people involved, except as specifically identified in Section 8. And then it goes on and says this specifically applies to faith-based activities, sporting activities, wedding stuff. So then we go to 8, and then it talks about, you know, if you have an essential business, right, then you're exempt from that gathering. But yeah, social and spiritual purposes is not an authorized reason to have a gathering in the state of Idaho in 2020.
Okay, so I've got Carl Fritz. I don't know if it was formed in the form of a question, but I'm going to form it that way. It says the ordinance of the executive emergency effectively cancels the rest of the Constitution and the Idaho State Code. What do you say to that?
I agree.
Okay.
I mean, the Idaho Constitution says you have a right to practice religion just like the Fed Constitution does, and you can't. So.
Right. Okay. So the next one. Let's see. I think that was just a statement.
And can I mention one more thing, Tom, real fast?
Of course.
You know, when I was doing some research on case law on these statutes, there's really no case law on any of these except as it comes to immunity. And if people want it, they should look at the emergency powers chapter in Idaho Code. But basically, I mean, there is immunity if they commandeer your equipment and damage it or destroy it, even death, if they cause a wrongful death, as long as it's not, I believe it's willful misconduct or gross negligence. So if a government official during an emergency is operating a vehicle in a merely negligent manner and they kill somebody, they are immune. And there was actually a case that I read out of Boise County where this is an ice storm that happened back in the 90s. Boise County commandeered this guy's loader. They operated it negligently, developed a fuel or oil leak. They left it on the side of the road to go get equipment to repair it. Mudslide comes down, takes that loader into the Payette River and completely destroys it. Idaho Supreme Court says the government did not have to compensate him for that loader. So that's just another nice side benefit of the emergency powers.
Right. Okay. So Robert Jones, he's got a long question, so I don't know if Seymour is going to open, but it says, what do you believe, Ed, that the legality is when it comes to doing a regular protest and possibly being cited for arrest? That's all I can see.
Yeah.
Well, I guess because people are protesting, so they want to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I think there was a group of 10 or so people that some of whom at least I know and respect, that went to the Capitol right after the order was put into effect. And I know they were standing down. I think they were social distancing. And yeah, I don't think anything happened to them. I didn't hear about anything bad happening to them. I don't know how aggressively they're going to enforce it. You know, I would imagine actually, and perhaps this runs contrary to what you think at first glance, but I think probably the state police who are stationed down at the Capitol, they're probably going to be some of the most lenient, because I don't think the state wants to, I mean, that's pure political expression at the Capitol. I don't think they want state troopers, you know, handcuffing people with signs. I think that's going to be a bad look. So those might actually be the more lenient ones. I don't know. And I'm not giving anybody legal advice here. In terms of, you know, if you are cited for having a gathering of more than 10 and it's non-essential, I mean, yeah, you can be cited. Theoretically, it's a misdemeanor. And I think, at least in the lower courts, it's going to be held up. And if you wanted to challenge it, you know, you want to take that case to the Idaho Supreme Court, I mean, yeah, you better have $15,000, $20,000 at least in your pocket. So, you know, operate at your own risk.
Somebody's going to have to,
I wish people would. I like civil disobedience, but, you know.
Well, somebody, I guess, is going to have to be the martyr, and, you know, really nobody wants to be. I mean, we all prefer to be lawful, you know, but somebody, you know, part of one of our principles in this country is to be able to challenge the authority of the government. Obviously, I would try to do that as respectfully as possible, even though I'm being completely abused, or partially or to somewhat being abused. So I know that you're in a position where you don't really like this word very much, and you have to kind of stay away from it. But if you had any, I shouldn't say advice for people, but if you had any thoughts or anything that you could share with us that sort of circumvents the whole advice thing, I mean, what would you have them do?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I'm a little disappointed in some of our legislators. We have some great liberty legislators. You and I both know who they are. And, you know, I've seen a few things, but I haven't really seen any concerted action. I'm hoping what that is signifying is deliberateness and thoughtfulness as they come up with a plan on this stuff. You know, Idaho Code does say that that the legislature, by concurrent resolution, can terminate a state of emergency. However, as far as I can tell, only the governor can call an emergency session. So I don't know how they would do that. And that's something that needs to be looked at in the next session is the legislature needs to assert some control. Maybe a third of legislatures can call a special session. Something like that needs to be put in place. I'd like to see more from our legislators. So I would encourage people to contact your legislators, especially if you live in a district with a liberty legislator. I think we need to be encouraging those people that it's okay to stand up. I mean, they're in a tough position too, because like I said, I think most people go along to get along, and they don't think deeply about their rights, Tom, the way we do. You know, they just, it's not on their radar. And so I think those of us who it is, we need to be reaching out to those people because they can probably have the most successful direct impact. You know, and if people want to engage in civil disobedience, I mean, I can envision a scenario where there's so many people engaging in civil disobedience that the government can't do anything about it and it renders it moot. But like you said, nobody wants to be the test case. And if you're the one guy who's out there and you get nailed, that sucks. So people need to be careful.
I've read about sound cannons. I don't want to have anything to do with that. I guess we're going to wrap it up because we're right about an hour, and I do value your time and
really I appreciate that.
Respect your
friendship. I enjoyed it a lot.
To do this. And if we need to do it again, I'm hoping that either you or somebody you know will be willing to step up with this, and hopefully I can get some law enforcement to do this. One of the action items that I had sent out in an email the other day was because of the fact that society is failing, a lot of it comes from the fact that we're unwilling to communicate. We like to generalize and we say that we're not like the left, but a lot of what we do is like the left in the fact that we try to put people in the box. And so my action item was to be able to visit, if you have a neighborhood cop, meet him. If you've got a friend that's an attorney and he's, we can all use more friends, let's face it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no doubt.
If you live next to a legislator, if you haven't met your police chief, if you haven't met your precinct committeeman, if you haven't met your mayor, make these appointments and take the time to be able to build that relational aspect, because there's a lot more credibility if I were to call you and if I was somebody you didn't know, or whether I was somebody you did know, that changes the whole dynamic on your willingness to even be able to do a video, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and I have one question for you, I guess, before we go.
Sure.
Is everybody's wanting to know this, and if not, I am, and I'll be bold enough to say it.
Go for it.
So there was an order that came up. It said that President Trump was going to be ordered up to 1 million National Guard.
Okay.
And then a few weeks or a week later, a lot happens in a day, where he activated the entire military. I am assuming all 4 branches. What's your thought on that and why?
Well, I gotta just be honest about my my limits of my expertise. I mean, I'm not an expert on the military or anything like that, but just as a logical matter, I mean, activating the entire military, well, I mean, most of it's active anyway, right? I mean, there's active duty soldiers on bases, right? There's ships that are out patrolling the ocean blue. So what does that even mean to activate the entire military? I guess that would be my question.
Well, why would they be doing it? So, I guess I'm just, it could be maybe some paranoia or whatever, but it's awfully perfect timing. You've got Event 201 that comes out and pre-plans for a pandemic, and in September 2019. Then you have the pandemic that's actually launched in, and all that. And then you have this incrementalism, right? Well, there's a disease or a virus in China, we don't know what it is, and then all of a sudden these incremental steps, and then all of a sudden it leads to, food rations, and then all of a sudden you can't buy non-essential items. Now all of a sudden you're in lockdown. I mean, what's going to happen tomorrow? And then to me, it makes it's very, very clear, at least from a historical standpoint and what I know as an activist, is why wouldn't the military be used to be able to quell civil unrest? Because they know that they must have something really, really big must be going on, whether it's a comet Atlas that's coming to the sun, or whether it's an attack from a foreign country. Now I know there's something going on with Venezuela and Russia and all that. And here's the thing that I can say: if I had to look in the government with all the pragmatism I have, how do you be able to inform people about maintaining their safety without creating a panic? And that's where, if I was the governor, I'm not even sure how I would make that work.
Oh, I think the government puts out safety information all the time, right? I mean, you can go online and you can get information about fire safety in your home. School children can get information about safe sex, right? But it's presented in hey, you should do these things for your safety.
Yeah,
so
right.
Kind of, I would think that the same thing could apply. Can I ask you one thing?
Sure.
So, like I said, I think maybe you're less skeptical of the police and military than I generally tend to be, and maybe I'm over skeptical. But, I see people talking about our rights and we got to protect our rights and all this, and then they're like, back the blue. Well, who do we think is going to be doing it, right? And then I think some people in our circles are too trusting that there's like this big underground movement in the military of people that, once we cross the Rubicon, then they're going to rise up and defend us. And I'm like, I think we've crossed it, man. I'm defending my freedoms. Well, my freedoms FYI, are not in Afghanistan. They're under attack right out here. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That kind of worries me about some folks in our movement.
And your question is?
Yeah, my question is, like, I mean, do you think that the military is going to end up protecting our rights, or are they going to be what they are, the sword arm of the state, and be the ones taking them away?
What does history say about that, you suppose?
Well, I'm not aware of any large contingents of British troops that defected to the colonial side. I'm not an expert on the Revolutionary War, but
yeah, well, you know, I've always suggested, and people, you know, I've been involved in the liberty circles for a long time, and when I started supporting law enforcement, I got a lot of flack for it, and they didn't really understand it. And you know, where it really came from was understanding enough about history to be able to know that although things are legislated, there is an enforcement mechanism, and it usually comes in the form of a uniform and a badge. And I knew when I started visiting with law enforcement to be able to figure out who these people were, I really understood that there's a lot of them that are absolutely as disgusted as you and I are about a lot of the things that we see, but they're like attorneys. They're like CPAs. They want to be able to do the best they can in a failing system. They recognize it's failing. They're not really sure what to do. They have an education that is a lot like what mine was or yours was when we went to public school. We didn't know any of this. We learned all of the things we knew now, you know, for me in the last 15 years. Sure. And so it's in our best interest not to necessarily protest and all of that, because I've never seen anything good happen from it, but to be able to try to exercise our civic duty and to be able to realize there's no quick fix to this. What we have to do is we have to work like we really care about each other, like we care about our communities, and to be able to outreach with our neighbors and to try to get to know our neighbors. And that includes our police chiefs and our sheriffs and our legislators, and to be able to not rip them a new one necessarily and say, well, are you going to obey the Constitution? They have no idea what you're talking about, because a lot of these guys that have been in office as long as they have been, this is a completely new phenomenon for them. The citizens had never questioned the Constitution with law enforcement like they do now. And law enforcement's like, whoa, wait a minute, you know?
It's a learning curve.
It is. And so we have to recognize that, because we ourselves are learning to try to understand law and the Constitution and rights and how all that stuff works and how to operate within a failing system, you know, and we're trying to navigate through this thing so we're not defined as a domestic terrorist or, you know, this or that or the other. We're individuals that care about our country, and we care enough about the people that we actually argue with as well, because we have no idea, we have no enmity toward them. So anyway.
I can respect that perspective.
Yeah.
I'm still going to rip them a new one if they violate the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's just I have to go back to loving God and loving my neighbor as myself, and that's kind of where I am personally. And
yeah, I mean, I think that's all we can fall back on at this point, Tom.
Yeah. Well, hey, Ed, I can call you Ed, right?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
Just don't call me late for dinner.
I appreciate you I appreciate you joining us. I hope that I hope it was beneficial for some of the people that attended, and I'm working on the technological side of this, but if you're ever up for doing it again, when things maybe become a little serious and we still have internet, then I think that would be fantastic. Thanks for what you do.
I'm happy to do it.
Thanks for what
God bless.
Do you want to give out your phone number or your contact information?
Yeah, so if people have additional questions, they can email me. It's my first name, Edward, EDWARD, at DK, as in Delta Kilo, lawboise.com. They can call me 208-713 or 8620.
And they can contact me for the info too, or just look you up on Facebook.
Yeah, look me up on Facebook, dklawboise.com.
All right, brother.
Take care. You guys take care. Bye-bye.
All right. See you later.